3 million pages of evidence, thousands of unsealed flight logs, millions of data points, names, themes, and timelines connected. You are listening to the Epstein Files, the world's first AI-native investigation into the case that traditional journalism simply could not handle.
Welcome back to the Epstein Files. Last time we walked through August 10th, 2019. Today we are following the medical examiner through the documentary records so the timeline, decisions, and institutional failures are clear. As always, every document and source we reference is available at epsteinfiles.fm. So start with officialruling.suicide. That is where the paper trail becomes specific and testable.
Precisely. And testable really is the key word here. We aren't looking for, grand conspiracies. We're looking for forensic discrepancies in the official record.
So to understand the suicide ruling, we have to start with the timeline, the one established by the Bureau of Prisons and the DOJ records.
We have to. We're not just auditing a conclusion. We're auditing the minutes and hours that built that conclusion.
Okay, let's reconstruct it. The morning of August 10th, 2019, the BOP records state that at approximately 6:30 a.m., personnel doing their rounds at the Metropolitan Correctional Center, the MCC.
They found Jeffrey Epstein unresponsive in his cell. But right there, the timeline starts to get messy. It does. The Jeffrey Epstein Files archive paints a picture of a sort of chaotic response. He was in the special housing unit, the SHU. He's transferred from there to New York Downtown Hospital.
But here's the first audit point, right? The medical intervention seems almost performative.
It was. The official timestamp for the declaration of death is a legal marker. Purely legal. Biologically, the event had concluded long before he even left the MCC.
So that official time of death, it just creates a legal boundary for the autopsy.
But the biological time of death,
yeah,
that's what's critical for the actual investigation,
wow.
And that's what the autopsy is supposed to determine.
Which brings us to the central document for today, the Office of Chief Medical Examiner, the OCME. They issued their determination. It was released to the public, cited everywhere in AP News reports.
The official ruling, cause of death, hanging,
yeah.
Manner of death, suicide.
On the surface, it's a standard classification. Seems straightforward.
It does. But when you pull the actual report and you cross-reference it with the description of the scene, the physics just don't align with what you'd typically imagine for a hanging.
What do you mean?
The report cites a bed sheet tied to the top of a bunk bed. We have to visualize the geometry that's described in the file. This was not a drop hanging.
Right. A drop hanging, like a judicial execution, is where the body falls, the rope snaps tight, and the neck breaks. The force is immense and sudden.
Exactly. That was not what was documented here.
So what was?
The records describe a kneeling position. His shins were on the floor.
He wasn't fully suspended in the air?
Not at all. His feet, or more specifically his knees and shins, never left the ground.
Okay, so in a kneeling hanging like that, what is the mechanism of death?
It's typically occlusion of the blood vessels. You lean forward, and the weight of your torso provides the compression against the ligature. It's a much slower, lower force event.
That distinction seems critical.
It's everything. Because the forensic markers left on the body, specifically the damage to the deep structures of the neck, they differ significantly between a violent drop hanging and a low-force kneeling suspension.
And yet the chief medical examiner, Dr. Barbara Sampson, she was very firm on this. The documents show her publicly defending the suicide ruling almost from the moment it was announced.
Pushing back hard against any suggestion of foul play.
And she had to, right, from an institutional perspective.
Practically speaking, yes. The skepticism wasn't just coming from the public or, online forums. If you dig into the tight lips and withheld source materials, you find that skepticism existed within the initial documentation itself.
Inside the system.
Inside the system. There were immediate questions logged about the materials used, the tensile strength of a standard issue prison bedsheet, the geometry of that bunk, the height of the attachment point relative to his neck. It wasn't just about him being dead. It was about the physics.
It wasn't just the physics of the sheet, though. It was the physics of the damage to his body. The official narrative solidified very, very quickly.
But the documents show that the consensus, it wasn't unanimous. Not inside that room.
And that's where the record gets really complicated. For a forensic auditor, this is where it gets interesting.
Because the autopsy wasn't performed in a vacuum. Given the high-profile nature of the case, the Epstein estate hired their own private forensic pathologist to observe the procedure. Dr. Michael Baden.
And we should be clear about who Dr. Baden is. He isn't just some random expert. He's a titan in the field, a former chief medical examiner for New York City himself.
He ran that office. He knows the protocols of that specific morgue, probably better than almost anyone alive. He's done something like 20,000 autopsies.
So he knows the room, he knows the procedure, he knows the people. He's not someone you can just dismiss.
Not at all. And according to the Epstein case documents and some of the unredacted Epstein wiki quotes, Baden's observations started to diverge from Dr. Sampson's almost immediately. He was there specifically during the examination of the neck organs.
And this is where the word homicide enters the forensic record, not as a theory, but as a medical determination based on observed tissue damage.
That's the key. Baden publicly stated that the evidence he saw on that table was, and this is a direct quote, more consistent with ligature strangulation.
Which is the medical term for homicide by strangling.
As opposed to suicidal hanging, yes.
That is a fundamental disagreement. It's not a minor point about the time of death. This is about the entire manner of death.
It's a complete divergence.
So what did he see? What specifically did Baden observe that triggered that assessment?
It all comes down to the friction that's recorded in the documents about the internal trauma. The Department of Justice disclosure logs, they show legal correspondence flying back and forth about these results.
The estate challenged the findings right away.
Immediately. Because Baden had identified specific trauma that just did not fit the official suicide narrative. He was looking at the internal structures of the neck, the scaffolding that holds your airway open.
Let's get granular on this. This is where we get to the hyoid bone. This is evidence block 3 in the audit.
The hyoid bone, yes, and also the thyroid cartilage. The autopsy documents reveal multiple fractures in these specific neck bones.
For anyone who isn't a forensic pathologist, can you explain the anatomy here? The Epstein case documents describe the hyoid as a horseshoe-shaped bone. Why is that bone so important?
The hyoid is unique in the human skeleton. It's a small U-shaped bone that sits up in the neck, between your chin and your thyroid cartilage, your Adam's apple.
And what makes it special?
It floats. It's not connected to any other bone. It's held in place by muscle and ligaments, and it supports the tongue. Because of its position, tucked deep under the jaw, and because it's flexible, it is actually quite difficult to break.
So it's not like a collarbone that can just snap on a simple impact?
Not at all. It requires a very specific directed force. And the records are clear. Epstein's was broken. But it wasn't just the hyoid.
The thyroid cartilage was also fractured.
Also fractured. The records indicate fractures on both the left and right sides of the larynx.
So we're looking at 3 distinct breakpoints. Left side of the thyroid cartilage, right side, and the hyoid bone itself.
Correct. 3 separate fractures. And this is where we have to look at the statistical anomalies that are referenced in the Epstein Files archive. How common is a broken hyoid in a hanging?
I've seen a lot of numbers on this, but what does the forensic data actually say?
It's statistically rare. Extremely rare in hangings generally, but specifically in the kind of kneeling hanging documented here.
So in a drop hanging where the body falls several feet.
You might expect to see significant structural damage, sure. The force is massive. But in a kneeling hanging, the pressure is gradual. It's just the weight of the torso leaning forward, not a sudden jolt.
And the physics of that suggests that the force generated just by leaning forward. It shouldn't be enough to snap 3 different bone and cartilage structures in the neck.
The forensic data suggests it's highly, highly improbable. The tight lips transcripts reference multiple studies. They show hyoid fractures occur in a very small percentage of suicidal hangings. We're talking single digits in some studies, maybe up to 20% in others, but almost always in violent drop hangings.
But in strangulation.
In manual strangulation or ligature strangulation from behind, it's a hallmark. It's one of the classic signs a medical examiner looks for.
Meaning someone squeezing the throat with their hands or pulling a cord tight from behind.
Exactly. When you strangle someone manually, the force is often applied from the sides. You're compressing the hyoid and the thyroid cartilage directly until they snap. In a kneeling hanging, the ligature usually pulls up and back, away from the hyoid.
But the official OCME report, it does acknowledge these fractures. They didn't try to hide them.
No, they listed them. But their conclusion, their explanation, was that such fractures can occur in hangings, particularly in older men. The reasoning is that the cartilage can become more calcified, more brittle with age.
Epstein was 66.
Correct. So, biologically, his cartilage would be more ossified. It starts to turn to bone, more so than a 20-year-old's. And rigid things, of course, break more easily than flexible things.
So that's the official explanation. He was older, his bones were brittle, and he leaned hard enough.
That's the narrative. But Dr. Baden didn't accept it.
Why not?
He argued that the constellation of fractures, those 3 distinct breaks, was fundamentally inconsistent with the soft, gradual pressure of a bed sheet in a kneeling position. He also pointed to the lack of other signs you typically associate with a clean hanging.
And the presence of signs you do associate with strangulation.
Right, which gets us to the burst capillaries.
Petechial hemorrhaging.
Yes. This is another classic forensic marker. When the jugular veins in your neck are compressed, but the carotid arteries are not, which can happen in a struggle or an incomplete hanging blood keeps pumping into the head but can't get out.
The pressure builds up.
And the tiny blood vessels in the eyes and on the face, they burst.
So did the autopsy report note petechia?
This is another major point of contention in the record. The reports are conflicting, depending on which observer's notes you're reading. But the general consensus in the Epstein case documents is that the classic heavy petechial hemorrhaging you see in a violent strangulation. It was debated.
But Baden saw something.
Dr. Baden's notes indicate hemorrhaging in the eyes. And that's significant because in a clean, complete hanging, you often don't see that. The arteries are compressed at the same time as the veins, stopping the blood flow entirely. Petechiae suggest a struggle, or a period where the veins were blocked, but the arteries weren't.
So Baden's argument rested on the combination of evidence. You have a body with 3 broken neck structures, which is rare for this type of hanging.
And you have hemorrhaging in the eyes, which is common for strangulation.
And this body was found in a cell where he supposedly hanged himself in a physical position that rarely, if ever, causes these specific injuries.
Precisely. Baden's argument, when you boil it down, was this. You have a body that looks for all the world like it was strangled, but we are being told to accept a narrative of suicide simply because of where he was found.
And that leads us directly to the context. A medical examiner doesn't just look at the body in a vacuum. They have to consider the history.
And the history here is unavoidable. You have to look at the incident on July 23.
You cannot evaluate August 10th without auditing July 23. So we have to rewind the clock. We're looking at logs cited by CNBC and WNBC. The headline was, Jeffrey Epstein on suicide watch after injury in jail.
This was roughly 2 weeks, maybe a little more, before his death. He's found injured in his cell.
In a fetal position with marks on his neck.
Correct. And at the time, he had a cellmate, Nicholas Tartaglione.
And let's be very clear about who Tartaglione was. He wasn't some white-collar criminal. He's a former police officer.
A former police officer facing the death penalty for 4 counts of murder. A quadruple homicide suspect. He's a very large, physically imposing man.
The files on the specific incident are incredibly murky. The internal disciplinary records that are referenced in the withheld FOIA responses are either almost entirely redacted or just missing.
There are 2 competing narratives in the files for that day. Narrative 1. Epstein attempted suicide on July 23.
Narrative 2. He was attacked by Tartaglione.
Epstein reportedly told his lawyers he was attacked. Tartaglione, through his lawyer, denied it. Said he saved him.
But here's the critical point for the forensic relevance. For the purpose of the institutional audit, it doesn't actually matter which one is true.
Exactly. If July 23 was a genuine suicide attempt, it established a clear, documented high-level risk of self-harm. The institution was on notice.
And if it was an attack?
It established a clear, documented threat to his life from within the facility. The institution was on notice.
Either way you slice it, the Bureau of Prisons was officially aware that his life was in imminent danger.
Precisely. And that official notice triggered a very specific protocol. Suicide watch. He was placed on 247 monitoring. Psychiatric observation. He's in a paper gown. No shoelaces, no bedsheets.
But then we see the shift in the documents, and this is where it gets strange. We're looking at the release from Vice and Motherboard. Here are all the newly released Epstein files from the Bureau of Prisons.
And they contain some bizarre correspondence about medical equipment.
The sleep apnea machine?
The CPAP machine.
Right.
Right. Epstein suffered from sleep apnea. He had a medical request for a CPAP machine.
Which is standard medical care. A prison can't deny an inmate necessary medical devices.
Of course not. But the logistics that are described in the internal emails, they are baffling from a security perspective. There's a whole chain of correspondence about extension cords to power the machine.
Extension cords?
Extension cords in a cell, in the special housing unit, for a man who had just been found with unexplained marks on his neck a few days prior.
The forensic audit question here is just blindingly obvious.
How does an inmate on recent suicide watch, or even on a step-down observation status, retain access to electrical cords, and heavy medical equipment.
A CPAP machine has a long, flexible hose. It has a heavy electrical cord. It has a mask. It is essentially a toolkit for self-harm if you are determined, or a weapon.
And yet the focus of the emails wasn't on the security risk. It was on the logistics of getting the machine to work. It shows a complete compartmentalization of logic within the institution.
The medical need just superseded the security protocol on the paper trail. He needs this machine for his health while ignoring the fact that the machine itself could be the instrument of his death.
And speaking of ignoring things, there's also the problem of the medical logs from the night of the death itself.
Or the absence of them.
Exactly. The source withheld FOIA request, denied, details a systematic blanket denial of access to the raw medical logs, specifically from the night of August 9th and the morning of August 10th.
What exactly are we missing there?
We're missing the granular data. The detailed handwritten rounds logs that would show exactly when a guard looked in the cell, what they claimed they saw, and the precise medical response times. We have the summary. Guards checked at X time. But we don't have the raw data. We don't have the ambulance logs.
Why would they withhold the ambulance logs? He was already dead. What secret could possibly be in an ambulance log?
Ambulance logs are incredibly dangerous for any kind of cover-up because they contain unvarnished, real-time observations by EMTs who are not part of the prison system. They are outside observers.
What do they document?
Body temperature, lividity, the pooling of blood after death, rigor mortis, the stiffening of the muscles. These data points establish the actual biological time of death, completely independent of the declared time of death by the prison.
So if the EMTs arrived at, say, 6:40 a.m. and they noted that full rigor mortis had already set in,
then he had been dead for hours. And if he had been dead for hours, the official guard logs claiming they checked on him 30 minutes prior and saw him sleeping would be proven fraudulent on the spot.
in rigor mortis, it usually takes a few hours to begin to set in, right?
It does. If he was warm and pliable, he died recently. If he was cold and stiff, he died hours ago. The fact that the Department of Justice is fighting to keep those specific EMT notes redacted tells a forensic auditor one thing. The biological timeline likely contradicts the bureaucratic timeline.
This moves us from the purely medical evidence to the administrative decisions that created this situation. Evidence block 5.
The decision to remove him from suicide watch. This is the pivot point for the entire event. Between July 29 and August 10th, a series of documented decisions were made that directly contradicted his known risk profile. We have the document DOJ OGR 0000-250007.
That document details the risk assessment. He was removed from the strict suicide watch and placed on what they called special observation. Then, shortly after that, he was moved to normal status in the SHU.
But even normal status in the SHU has certain protocols. It's not the general population. It does. And the most critical one in this case is the roommate protocol. The Bureau of Prisons' own psychology services guidelines generally mandate that any inmate who has recently been removed from suicide watch should not be housed alone.
But he was alone on August 10th?
He was alone because his cellmate was transferred out on August 9th. The records show the cellmate was removed and, this is a crucial part, no replacement was brought in. He was left by himself.
Who made that decision? Who signed off on that?
That specific authorization is the administrative failure we can trace in the files. The specific name is often redacted or is buried in bureaucratic procedure, but the result is indisputable. A high-risk inmate with a documented neck injury from just 2 weeks prior was left alone in a cell.
Left alone with a surplus of bed linens.
Because the roommate left, but the bunk and the linens for that bunk remained, potentially providing extra materials.
This all leads to the soft cover-up theory that's referenced in the source, the theory of cover-ups.
It's a concept used in intelligence analysis and in audits of systemic corruption. They call it institutional-assisted suicide. You don't need a hitman. You don't need a grand conspiracy with secret agents.
You just have to stop doing your job, systematically.
You create the conditions for death to occur. You observe the risk. That's July 23. You document the risk he's put on suicide watch. And then step by step, you remove every single safeguard.
You take away the constant observation?
You take away the eyes, the guards stop looking, you take away the witness, the roommate is transferred out, you provide the means, the sheets, the solitude, the electrical cords for the CPAP machine.
It's negligence by design.
Or it's a level of negligence so convenient that it functions as design. And the Department of Justice files show that high-level officials, including an associate warden, were paying extremely close attention to Epstein. This is not some forgotten inmate. This was arguably the most high-profile prisoner in the entire federal system at that moment.
So the argument that, oops, we just forgot to check on him, doesn't really hold water when you see the email traffic showing how closely they were monitoring his every move.
Exactly. The discrepancy between the high-level attention being paid to him and the ground-level failure of basic protocols, that is the soft cover-up. It allows the institution to claim incompetence rather than malice. We messed up is a much better legal defense than we allowed it to happen.
Let's talk about the unresolved gaps. Evidence block 6. We keep seeing the word withheld in our source list.
The withheld pattern is consistent. It's not random. As we mentioned, the FOIA denials specifically target the medical examiner's raw, handwritten notes and the ambulance logs. But there's another massive data gap.
The video cameras.
The glitch. The missing video evidence from the cameras that were pointed at the area outside his cell. We've seen this repeatedly in the withheld source material. The official explanations are all over the place. The cameras malfunctioned, the footage was overwritten, they pulled the wrong footage initially, and the correct footage was lost.
It feels like a pattern. Every time you reach for a piece of hard, objective evidence, it seems just dissolve.
It is a pattern. And what's crucial is that it's not limited to Epstein. We have to cross-reference the death of Jean-Luc Brunel.
Brunel, the modeling agent, a central figure in the network, a key recruiter.
He was sitting in a high-security French prison, La Santé, awaiting trial. High security, high profile. He was the next biggest domino to fall in the entire case. And then what happens?
He's found dead, hanging.
Jeffrey Epstein associate Jean-Luc Brunel found dead in prison of suicide. That's the headline. The official ruling again was suicide.
So we have 2 men, both holding the keys to the entire network, both in secure government custody in 2 different countries.
Both dead by hanging before they could ever testify in a trial.
From a forensic auditing perspective, what does that mean?
2 points establish a line. This establishes a repeatable pattern of institutional failure. It demonstrates that when the specific defendants are high-value targets related to this specific criminal network, the security systems in place to protect them mysteriously fail in identical ways.
It makes the simple negligence argument much harder to accept. Lightning striking twice.
In the exact same spot on the exact same type of target.
So let's synthesize all of this. We have an official ruling of suicide. Legally, on paper, that is the truth.
Legally, yes. But forensically, the document trail itself is screaming with contradictions.
We have the hyoid bone fractures, rare for the documented type of hanging, but very common for strangulation.
We have the dissenting opinion of a world-renowned pathologist, Dr. Baden, recorded in the files, challenging the core mechanism of death based on that physical trauma.
We have the July 23 incident, a documented precursor event that was either a failed suicide attempt or a failed homicide attempt.
And we have the procedural violations. The documented step-by-step removal of standard safety protocols, the removal of his cellmate, the failure of the cameras.
And then finally, the pattern of data suppression. All the withheld files, the missing logs.
The tension here lies between the clean official paper, the death certificate that simply says suicide, and the messy forensic reality. The broken bones, the missing logs, the convenient systemic negligence.
So the medical examiner's report, it gives us a conclusion, but it doesn't solve the equation.
It answers how he died in the most technical sense, asphyxiation by hanging. But it fails to explain the physical anomalies that point to how that asphyxiation was actually achieved. Was it by the weight of his own body, alone in his cell, or was it by the force of another? The bone fractures suggest external force. The prison logs suggest solitude. Those 2 things cannot logically coexist.
One of those records is incomplete, or it's false.
And that is what the Epstein files ultimately show us time and again. A record full of holes that were placed there, either by omission or commission, by the very institutions that were responsible for keeping the record in the first place.
It leaves you looking at the failures of the entire system, not just what happened inside one cell.
The body tells one story. The Bureau of Prisons tells another. And the medical examiner's office signed off on the version that caused the least amount of trouble for the state.
You're left with a dead man who can't talk, and a pile of official documents that seem to refuse to speak clearly.
But the fractures speak. The fractures are still there in the record. They haven't gone away.
Next time, we move from the medical examiner's room to the hallway outside the cell. Next time, the guards.
You have just heard an analysis of the official record. Every claim, name and date mentioned in this episode is backed by primary source documents. You can view the original files for yourself at epsteinfiles.fm. If you value this data-first approach to journalism, please leave a 5-star review wherever you're listening right now. It helps keep this investigation visible. We'll see you in the next file.